So we're in your government. We're in Chapter 5, Section 4. This is the last section of the powers of Congress. So this whole section applies to Congress, Congress being the legislative branch where all the laws are made. And so Section 4 talks about the delegated powers and the powers that are denied Congress. It comes from the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 and 9. All of Article 1 talks about Congress, right? So in this article it tells us that powers could be exercised, and there are certain powers that cannot be exercised. Powers that are delegated are those powers that are exercised, they have the power to do, and powers denied are the ones they cannot do. It's pretty easy there. So we're going to talk about the powers implied in this here. It says the creation of the Air Force in 1947 is an example of Congress implied powers. So we'll see what's the difference between exercised powers or expressed powers and implied powers. So expressed powers are given explicitity to the article, from the article. So basically they're the powers that are expressed. They are expressed in the clause of number 1 through 17 of the article in Section 8 that very explicitly give out these powers that are given to Congress. So they're named powers there. You can read them and they have the power, right? And the next one, implied powers. Implied powers are those powers which are not specifically stated in the Constitution but have been implied in expressed powers. So they are implied that they have power. Because they have power in one, they should have power in another. So implied powers, again, these two are basically powers that are delegated: expressed powers and implied powers. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 says, so what does it say here? It says the implied powers are those powers which, okay, let's go on here, it's right here, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into the execution and foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. This is the necessary and proper clause. This necessary and proper clause has both expressed and implied powers in it. It does not give Congress powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution. So it's not to say we can give Congress whatever power we want because whatever necessary and proper. No, the necessary proper clause says there are certain things that are implied, but they also have to go along with the expressed powers. So Article 5 explains how new powers can be given or changes can be made by amending powers too. So either you're going to amend the powers of the Constitution and you go through amendments, or you can have a necessary and proper clause in saying certain things are necessary and proper. So today Congress exercises numerous powers that are nowhere mentioned in the Constitution. These powers are based on Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which permits Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. This necessary and proper clause gives Congress the authority to put into operation both expressed and implied powers. So I'm just reading from your book here. So Article 5 also, as I said before, explains how new powers can be given or changed, and this is called amendment process. So it says, however, in recent decades, the necessary and proper clause has been interpreted by federal courts to grant additional powers to Congress, such as the power to legislate personal income taxes for the purpose of redistributing the nation's wealth to achieve more economic equality. Bing! Bingo! So what they put through the Supreme Court, it says necessary and proper, that they felt that now it was necessary and proper for us to, for our incomes, our income taxes to be redistributed to other people. This is socialistic. So this is socialism. And so they actually used this elastic clause. That's this clause of the basically necessary and proper clause is called the elastic clause because it can stretch it. They stretch this clause, the powers of Congress, to say, oh, what we want to do is take from the wealthy and give to the poor and make everybody's economic situation the same. And this definitely is socialism or communism. And it actually had gone through the Supreme Court to do this using this necessary and proper clause. This is pretty bad. And that's what a lot of the politicians now want to do, is they want to rewrite the Constitution through this necessary and proper clause, and basically saying that these new laws, which are not delegated by the Constitution, can be slipped in as being necessary at this time. It's called the broad interpretation, stretching the clause, the elastic clause, they call it. So that's pretty important that you know about that. So the executive powers within each house, what powers do they have? You need to know this, okay? What powers are expressed for the House of Representatives, which is Congress, or the Congress, which is the Senate? Congress has two houses, the House of Representatives and the House of the Senate, right? So what can the House of Representatives do? First of all, number one, all revenue bills, anything to do with money, has to go through the House of Representatives. That's number one. Number two, they can select a president from the three top candidates of the Electoral College if there wasn't a majority in the Electoral College. So if there's three top candidates and neither one of them have had a majority with the Electoral College, the House of Representatives can pick the President of the United States. That's a big job. And number three, that they basically can confer charges of impeachment against federal officials, including the President, right? So three things they can do. Number one, all bills, money bills or revenue bills, are presented there. And they can actually pick a president if there's not a majority rule in the Electoral College. The House can pick the president, who's going to be president, if it comes to that point. And number three, they can impeach a president or a federal official. Impeach is that they confer charges against them. So those are for the House of Representatives. Now let's see what the Senate can do. A little bit different. The Senate here. You have over here the Senate. The executive powers of the Senate. So the powers can be, when I say exclusive powers, they're not executive, exclusive powers. When I say executive, you think of the vice president. Sorry, I didn't mean to use that word. The exclusive powers of the Senate are, they can choose a vice president from the two top candidates if no candidate majority of electoral votes. So they can't choose the president, but they can choose a vice president. Number two, they can approve all presidential appointments. So when the president makes an appointment for his cabinet, for his Secretary of State or Secretary of Business of anything, any kind in his cabinet and all of his bureaucracies, the Senate needs to approve the president. So that's a check and balance on the president. Number three, they will try all the cases of impeachment. So the House of Representatives will charge an official, whether it be president or vice president or any other official or judge, for impeachment. But all the trying of the case, the trials, go through the Senate. So the Senate will have to go through the trials, trying all cases of impeachment. So number four, it has to approve all presidential treaties. So when a president is making a treaty with a country or a people, the Senate needs to approve it. So the Senate, going back, can choose a vice president if there's not a majority vote. It has to approve all of the presidential appointments, and it has to try any cases of impeachment and approve all presidential treaties. Those are the exclusive powers for the Senate and the exclusive powers for the House of Representatives. I already did. So the Senate has to, in approving all presidential appointments, is a big deal. You know, when there's a controversy, they call, let's go down here, it talks about senatorial courtesy. When there's when the president nominates a federal officer to serve in a political state, in a particular state, I should say, politically. So basically, the president nominates an officer to serve in a state. And if the senator from that state involved, you know, and of the same party says no, they don't want to be working with that nomination of the president, then the Senate will, out of courtesy to the senator, refuse to confirm the president's appointee. So let me just go over that a little bit. So a president wants to appoint a certain person to work with a certain state, but the state senator there says, no, I don't want to work with that president's appointment of that person. So out of courtesy, the Senate will say, no, we're not going to approve that president's appointment because the senator doesn't want to work with that person. So that's called senatorial courtesy, being the president just can't just push somebody in to work with the state if the state does not approve of it. So on to impeachment. Impeachment has been a big deal as they try to impeach President Trump. In fact, the House of Representatives did bring forth impeachment, but he was not convicted. The Senate tried him on impeachment, and it came up that he was not guilty of any of the impeachment that was basically determined for him. So, but we've had a couple other cases of impeachment. So the House of Representatives has the sole power under Article 1, Section 2 to impeach. What is impeachment anyway? Impeachment is to formally accuse a federal officer of wrongdoing. And any House member in the House of Representatives can accuse an officer, an executive, whether it be the president or the vice president or a judge or anyone in the federal courts for impeachment. So the House of Representatives can accuse a federal officer of wrongdoing. And of course, this includes the high officers such as the president and the vice president and chief justice or any other. So the House votes on whether to impeach or not. They have a vote. And specific articles of impeachment are drafted and stating the grounds for removal. Impeachment means that they want to remove this person from their position. So the House appoints some managers then to present the case to the Senate. And then the Senate conducts the impeachment trial. So let's go up here. Talks more about impeachment there. So the Senate then the Senate conducts the impeachment trial. Only the Senate can try for impeachment. So the Senate hears the charges and then acts as a jury, to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused. The Senate has to have a 2/3 of vote to impeach. So when a president is to be impeached, the Constitution requires that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court rules, rather than the Vice President can't come in, and because the Vice President, remember, is the president over the Senate. So the Vice President can't have anything to do if it has to do with the impeachment of the president, because the Vice President works with the president, right? So the Chief Justice will come in that case. Otherwise, the Vice President, if it's not the president, it's a judge or it's someone else, then the Vice President can preside over, in the midst of the trial. So we're talking about serious deal, huh? So in history we have 19 officials that were impeached by the House of Representatives. 15 of them received the impeachment trial in the Senate. So 19 were accused, 15 received the trial, only 8 were convicted and removed from office. And most of these were all federal judges. There were 2 presidents in the past. Number 1 was President Andrew Johnson. After Lincoln was assassinated, Johnson became president. And basically, he too was impeached by the House of Representatives, and then the Senate failed by only 1 vote to take him from his job of presidency. So that was Andrew Johnson, the 17th president of the United States. So he didn't get impeached, but only because of 1 vote. Bill Clinton was also accused by the House of Representatives of charges. These charges being, well, I'm not going to go into Bill Clinton's charges, but anyway, the Senate did acquit Bill Clinton, so he did not get under trial. He did not get removed from office. So President Nixon also would have been impeached, but he resigned on August 9th of 1974. So he resigned before, because he would have been impeached in the whole Watergate trials we know in the midst. And so he resigned, and so did his, earlier did his vice president resign, and the Secretary of State, which was Ford, became president through that. So there have been 3 presidents now with Trump. So Senate can punish only by removing from office or barring from future federal offices. So when a president gets impeached, doesn't mean that president is going to go to jail. It's only for removing them from office. So that's all about impeachment. So then let's go over the denied powers. There's powers that Congress cannot do. It's denied powers, and these are stated in the Constitution too. So we're going to go over these quickly, but you can look these up. But the Congress cannot first create bills of attainder or ex post facto laws or grant titles of nobility. So we're going to go over those. They cannot be appointed to any federal position that was established during his term of office or pay was increased in them. So basically saying ex post facto laws are when they cannot be appointed to a federal position that was established and the pay was increased so they could use this position for their own good, right, instead of for the good of the country. So the law was already granted, that was granted after they had already had their position. So that's what it's saying. This prevents Congress from creating lucrative government offices, so a person resigning from Congress then goes into Congress and resigns from Congress and then can take those jobs that he created in Congress. So in Congress, those jobs were created, then he can go back and run those jobs himself, like he created those jobs from himself. That's what it prevents. And also, Congress cannot hold any other federal position during his term in office. So he can't be the governor and a senator both, right? So let's talk about what happened during the Civil War. So during the Civil War, let me go back. I think I missed this. Okay, yeah. Right. So during the Civil War, the 14th Amendment, Congress engaged in rebellion against the United States, basically saying that there were a lot, because we had, the North and the South, right? And in the South withdrew, in the midst of the divided country of the North and the South, and the states basically were seceding from the Union, and so there were enemies in the midst that had been involved in Congress, and so the congressmen that were engaged in rebellion against the United States gave aid to comfort the enemies. The South was the enemy at that time. After taking office, could no longer be a senator or representative unless Congress removed the prohibition by a 2/3 vote in both houses. So what happened is, of course, after the Civil War, there were a lot of congressmen from these states, whether the state would be South Carolina or Virginia or wherever it was, that were senators before. They couldn't just have their positions back unless that prohibition was voted on by a 2/3 vote in both houses of the Senate and House that says that they could come back, because they were considered enemies of the Confederacy of the South. So that was a big deal, because in the midst of that, they thought, couldn't they just come back and be congressmen after the war? Well, no, not if they were enemies and they had withdrawn to the Confederacy. They couldn't unless they were basically, the prohibition against them was voted by 2/3 vote to let them in as an officer, whether it be a senator or a congressman. So many of our founding fathers, of course, had a biblical view of human nature. They knew about man's sinful nature. So the government power was essential for civilized society, but they also didn't want to give that government power too much power, right? So that the individuals would have liberties and freedoms of American citizens. This was a really delicate balance of power that was needed between individual liberty, our Bill of Rights, our rights as individual, and the government power. And this is where all of this came in checks and balancing, as the Congress balanced the executive branch, and as the executive branch and the Supreme Court, as they all balanced each other. So basically, this is very delicate, this delicate balance between our individual rights and the government's power. I think the writers were very, very aware of the limitations of what mankind can do. They were very afraid of getting a dictator in. James Madison here, I love what he writes here. This kind of gives a conclusion to all that we've been talking about Congress. In the Federalist, number 51, James Madison wrote, "What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external or internal controls in the government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this: you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself." I love that. He's saying, if men were angels, which they're not, we wouldn't have to have government. And if angels were governing men, then we wouldn't have to really be controlled so much. We wouldn't have to worry about the control. But in government, that's not the way it is. So government is administered by men that are faulty. The arm of men will fail us. And also we as mankind are basically sinful in nature. So the difficulty lies that we first must enable the government to control the governed, and the next place to oblige it to control itself. So that's James Madison. Very true. Conclusion here. Let's look at this conclusion. Congress has been given all legislative power by the United States Constitution, right? All the laws written by Congress. The Constitution stipulates many things about the Congress, including its powers, processes, and qualifications for membership. Other things like political parties and standing committees have come about over time as members of Congress have desired greater efficiency within its body. Talks about Congress. So that is the end, but I'm going to have to move over the questions that I want to go over. The express powers, because some of these powers we didn't talk about. Remember I said about, in the express powers, it said that we could actually create a navy and an army, but it didn't say anything about an air force, because at that time they didn't consider we had an air force. But now the air force just falls into all of those, as for our defenses, Air Force is the same as our Army, so so that would be implied powers. But let's talk about the powers of Congress here. I'm going to go over these quickly here. Expressed powers. I'm not going to read it, but just kind of go over it quickly. So, Congress has the powers to lay and collect taxes, duties. Oh, it says lay and collect taxes, duties, and imposts on excises. So, what are they talking about? Taxes are compulsory payments that are levied. Taxes, you know what taxes are. Duties are an obligation owed to the government, a duty. An impost is a tax paid on imports and exports. Those are imposts. Excises are taxes on the sale of goods like gasoline or sale on performance like telephone services. Those are excises. So Congress can lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. So the Constitution, though, prohibits the passage of any direct taxes. The 16th Amendment, though, was passed. Amendment to the Constitution, 1913, very important. The 16th Amendment, basically in 1913, says what? This one we all know, that the IRS can collect taxes, income taxes. Now can directly tax American for their income. This was the amendment, 16th Amendment to the Constitution. Okay, other powers are what? Congress can borrow money. That means it can issue bonds, promise to pay back loans with interest over a specific time, and sometimes they have a deficit problem spending for Congress in the midst of borrowing money. Sometimes Congress borrows is borrowing too much money. Number 2, regulating commerce. A buyer or seller of goods among the states and cities and countries can regulate commerce between the states and between cities and between countries. And this is a power by Congress that's to regulate these, and even among Native Americans also. So just regulating commerce we have there. On to regulating rules for naturalization. So to become a citizen. So there's rules to become a citizen. So that's why right now we have people coming in that are illegal aliens just coming in and saying that they're citizens, right? But there are rules the Constitution has set down to become a citizen. To regulate rules for bankruptcy. So when people cannot pay back their debts, there's rules in the Constitution for bankruptcy. To coin money and to set the value of domestic and foreign coins. So to coin money. So it used to was set by gold standard or silver-based standard, either a gold or silver. And now through coining money comes to be able to print paper currency, or paper dollar. And so that's, let me go on here. Today, the Bureau of Mint has to be able to establish to coin money and the printing of currency, right? So, also to punish counterfeiters, those that are coining money and making money unlawful, counterfeiting money, to punish them. And they have developed the U.S. Secret Service to investigate these counterfeiters. Number 7, to fix the standard of weights and measurements. So Congress is given authority with the National Institute of Standards and Technology to fix weights and standards. To punish piracy and felonies in the seas, like pirates. To basically those that are robbing ships and everything, to be able to set forth crimes in this area of crimes of the sea, abiding by international law right here. Felonies committed on the seas. To establish a post office. So Congress has the right to establish a post office. Also to post roads for a post office. So to make roads to the post office, to build roads so that we can have our postal service. To issue patents and copyrights to inventors and authors, so that basically they'll have exclusive rights to their inventions and other people can't take their inventions and their rights to their books and such and use them for their own benefit. So patents and copyrights. To create federal courts below the Supreme Court. So all of our federal courts, the Congress can basically create federal courts that are created, except for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is by the Constitution, but otherwise all the federal courts can be made by Congress. Congress has the right to declare war. Only Congress can declare war on other nations. To raise and support an army and navy and make rules for their governing. So here it goes. Congress organizing, pays, and regulates armed forces. Appropriation to the Army are set at 2-year periods. This does not apply to the Navy. So Congress makes laws and governs the military. And these laws are more severe than regular civil powers. And the Army and Navy have their own courts, courts. So, and that's by Congress. So they can call forth the militia and provide for its organization and army and discipline. The militia, what's a militia? They can bring forth citizens that are, rather than army soldiers that they train. This is called militias, or armies made up of citizens rather than trained soldiers. And the Congress can use the militias to enforce federal laws, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. So they can call forth a militia. They can govern and administer the seat of government. So, which means the seat of government is for the United States and the District of Columbia. So Washington, D.C. is not a state and has no representative in Congress. Now later on we'll have an amendment to this law that gives Washington, D.C. Representatives. So at least in, not necessarily representatives to vote, representatives, but be able to vote in the Electoral College on the passage of federal laws. And we'll see that as an amendment later on. But it was set forth that Washington, D.C. didn't have representatives. So, govern and administer all federal property. So, Congress provides government and administers like our forts, our magazines, our arsenals, our dockyards, and other needful buildings. These are all buildings, and Congress needs to provide for them. So they must purchase the land for them, and the permission of the state legislature to do them. They have to ask the states if they can purchase the land, and then the federal property purchased by the Congress is governed by federal law. So we have these our forts and arsenals and all these things that are put forth by Congress to take care of in the midst. And then of course this last part here for powers given is the implied powers, the necessary and proper clause of the last clause. Congress has the power to make any laws that are needed in carrying out the express powers listed above. For example, the courts have ruled that Congress has the power to create a national bank because Congress has the power to coin money, and to coin money they need a bank, right? The way that the courts have interpreted the necessary and proper clause has given Congress almost unlimited latitude in passing laws of their choice. That's not good. Powers denied Congress. What Congress cannot do. Congress cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus. So what is the writ of habeas corpus? It means to produce the body, but it means a court must give cause to why an individual is being detained. So this prevents incarceration without cause. Basically saying that they cannot come and just take an individual and put them in jail without a cause, right? So basically this is the writ of habeas corpus. That the individual is being detained. If a person is being detained in jail, they must know why they are being put in jail. Not saying, okay, we just want to put you in jail, you know. So that's the writ of habeas corpus. So Congress cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus and say that it's putting someone in jail. It cannot pass bills of attainder. What are bills of attainder? A bill of attainder is a law that punishes a person without a trial. So they can't go and beat a person up or put them in stocks or do these old things that whip a person or something without a trial. So Congress cannot pass bills of attainder in this. Congress cannot pass ex post facto laws. So what's ex post facto law? It means after the deed. So laws are laws that punish a person for an activity that was not legal at the time that the act was committed. So something in the past, was not legal. Say it's having slaves was legal back then, but it's not now. So they can't go back and punish that person for their crime in the past when it was legal. So that's ex post facto. So Congress, in laying a capitation tax or a direct tax, and so this comes at that time. A capitation tax is a head tax, a tax levied directly on individuals. So that direct tax, with the exception of the income tax, and that's in Amendment 16, Congress cannot levy direct taxes on people. The power to place a direct tax on income is granted to Congress through only the 16th Amendment income tax in 1913. Congress cannot lay a tax or duty on any goods exported from the United States. Congress cannot place a tax on goods being exported abroad. They cannot do that. They giving performance to ports in one state over the ports of another state. So they can't say, okay, we're going to favor this state over this state. They can't do that. Drawing money from the Treasury except in accordance with the law. So this is the power of the purse. So money from the federal treasury must be spent in accordance with the laws passed. So they cannot just take laws for no good reason. They have to have in accordance with the laws passed for whatever money that drawing of the treasury has to be gone through the law. They cannot grant titles of nobility. What's a title of nobility? Like a king or a queen or so. So no title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever, like kings or princes or anything like that. We cannot give titles. Congress cannot give titles of nobility. Okay. So let's go over the section review quickly here. Number 1, explain the difference between express powers and implied powers. Express powers are those that are expressed in the Constitution explicitly, right? And then implied are those powers that are implied necessary to those expressed powers. So an example would be because Congress was given, the Constitution gave the power to coin money. To coin money, then we needed a bank. So that would be an implied power that you have to have a bank to do that. So number 3, what are the special powers of the House number 2, what is the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution? So the necessary and proper clause is to make laws needed for those expressed in the Constitution that are implied. So necessary and proper mean implied powers. Number 3, what are the special powers of the House of Representatives? Number 1, they are responsible for all money or revenue bills. Number 2, they can select a president. If the Electoral College doesn't have a majority vote, they can select a president. Number 3, they can bring impeachment charges against a president or any government official. So 3 things. The Senate, what are the special powers of the Senate? First of all, they can choose a vice president. Not the president, but the vice president, if there's no electoral majority. Number 2, they can approve, they must approve, or they can approve presidential appointments. When the president appoints, like a judge or something, the Senate needs to approve it. Number 3, they can trial the impeachment. The House of Representatives accuses the impeachment charges, and the Senate puts them under trial. So number 4, they approve all presidential treaties. The Senate has to approve all presidential treaties. So, briefly describe the impeachment process. We went over that. Name 2 United States presidents were impeached. President Clinton and President Johnson, right? So, so the House, how to do impeachment? The House formally accuses of impeachment. It has to go through all that process there before and brings it to the Senate, and then the Senate has to put it under trial. Basically, the Senate conducts a trial, and it has to they have to have 2/3 vote to impeach a president. All right. So the House votes, appoints managers, special articles, and all such, and then brings that case to the Senate, and the Senate puts that impeachment trial, and the vote has to be 2/3 to impeach or remove a president or any government official. So, number 6, the last one here. List some of the powers denied Congress. Okay, we know those. So, we went over all those. Bills of attainder. That cannot step in habeas corpus. Cannot give direct tax, and except for go over that. We went over those whole things, so I'm not going to go over that again. But just look above, and you can see all those powers that are denied. So that's the end. The end of actually this whole chapter. You can go over the chapter review if you like, or go ahead and do your test in the midst of Congress.